on the technology side, and I will be continuing to admit people. So welcome. I'm really honored that all of you, we have a really terrific crowd here to be witness Lady Esther, Dame Arlette, and Dr. Schrager. I am the only one who does not have a title at this event. So I am really taking a very big back seat to the audience, the presenters here, but they have turned into be really, really great friends of mine. And I'm really honored and excited to be doing the program with these guys. So I'm going to start off by doing a little bit of a technology check. Obviously, we are on Zoom here. Zoom is a technology that is tied to the internet. And if you get kicked off for any reason, all you need to do is click back on the screen, on the link. I will admit you. I am constantly admitting all throughout the program. So you never have to worry about not getting back in. The other things I want to do is, because we have so many people, we're now close to 75 people here, and we're getting to the programming cap, which is quite exciting. I want to show you how to use some tools which are essential, because we have so many different screens. There's no way that I can see all of you, because the recording will always have the presenter view, so I can't really help, and that's why Dana is going to help me in taking a look at the multiple screens. So the first thing I want to tell you is how to use chat. So on the bottom of your screen, typically, there's an icon that's marked chat, and I want you to click on that and open it. And then I want each of you to say who you are and tell us where you're chatting from, so we can all see how many different countries are engaged here. So please, right now, go ahead, write your name and tell me where you're from. And I'll say hello to you because I can see it. And Jackie Young is from the UK. Welcome, Jackie. Jackie is a survivor from Terezin, so we're really thrilled and honored to have you. Hi, Debbie. She's from Oregon. Marlene is from New York. Tony, they're going so quickly. Robin is from, I can't go that fast. Okay, from the Netherlands, from Portland, Oregon, Ruth Bollinger. Judith Bender is from Carlsbad, where I am. Ava Zakarian. Hi, Ava. Right here from San Diego, my long-lost cousin. Mark is from Omaha. And we have someone from Canada. And Mark Zalisky is here, and I think that is an invite from you, Esther, so welcome. We have someone, Ursula is from Connecticut. Ursula is a great friend of the programming and the JCHR. Someone's from, Bobby's from Marina del Rey, and it's slowed down, so I guess, and oh, we want to say hello to Zola from Cape Town, South Africa. So now all of you have experienced how to use chat. And so this was a very exciting way to use the technology and to get to show you. Now, what I want you to make sure that you want, if you want to send a direct message, you just click on the blue button in chat. There's a down arrow. It'll allow you to send a personal message to anyone in the group. Or if you want to talk to the group as everyone, you just click on the everyone. The other thing I want to basically share with you is there is on your toolbar, there is a reactions button. So I want you all to help me out on this question. How many of you have seen the movie prior to this event? And I want you, just like I want you to raise your hand. And what I want to see is how many people are raising their hands and have seen. There isn't a requirement to see the movie. I want to make sure you know that. But it's very interesting to see how many people haven't seen the movie prior to. And it looks like the majority of people have not seen the movie prior to, which is pretty typical of the programming that I've done in the past. So that's always good for me to know. You also now know how to raise your hand and how to use it. So when we get to the Q&A section, because we probably have we do have 83 people in this program right now, and there's 25 per screen, so we have more than 3 screens going. we need you to raise your hand or we can't see you. Once you raise your hand, you come to the front of the screen for us, and we can easily call on you. So that being said, I want to, oh boy, there's 13 people just waiting to get into the program right now. So that's quite amazing. And we're going to bump up to the cap. So what I want to get started is with our program today. And I want to introduce Lady Esther, and I'm going to read her bio to you. So Esther was born here in the United States in Chicago. She's a first-generation American. Her parents were born in, I hope to get this right, it's Volyn, Volyn, now northwestern Ukraine. Her father came to the United States in 1921. Her mother came in 1941. She grew up in Sun Valley, Idaho. That's an interesting place for a Jewish family to live. The only Jewish family for about 150 miles. She married and moved to Edmonton, Canada, had 2 daughters. She moved to London, Ontario, ran away from home. She met Sir Martin Gilbert, traveling to him, and lived in London in the UK for 17 years. She married him for 10 of those years until his death, unfortunately, 7 years ago. On Martin's suggestion, she created a series of books called the Holocaust Memoir Digest, based on the eyewitness accounts from published survivor memoirs to be used as a teaching and research tool. She wrote a 6-part course on the Holocaust, sort of what she calls the Holocaust 101, and have helped Martin with his work. She's also the project director of the almost completed translation of the Sarny Yizkor book, posted on Jewish Gen. And in 2011, Martin and Esther spent 10 days in the area where her parents grew up in the Ukraine, my ancestral homeland, and where my family is buried and either destroyed cemeteries or in mass murder sites. Esther says the Holocaust is to learn what happened and how it happened, has been, to quote Primo Levi, my elemental need. She recently moved in October to the Canadian Rockies, where she is zooming in from today, and to Canmore. And she's now using Zoom to be in touch with the outside world, and she's really busier than ever. I'm really honored to have Esther program with us. She's already done 3 with the Jewish Culture and Holocaust Remembrance Group that I founded. And she has 2 daughters, one in Canmore and one in Israel, 5 grandsons. And she's working to keep Martin's work known and available. She does monthly newsletters with excerpts from his writing, and she writes for herself. She's also the trustee of the UK Sir Martin Gilbert Learning Center. They also do Zooms. I recommend you zooming in with them. I often go on their Zooms, always so educational. And finally, she was on the film crew for The Rescuers, and Sir Martin's assistant, and they traveled through 10 countries to film the Holocaust, where righteous diplomats had worked and where Jews have been saved. So I want to give a Jewish Culture and Holocaust Remembrance welcome to my friend, Esther Gilbert. So welcome, Esther.
Thank you, Jeffrey, and welcome. It's wonderful to be here and to present this film, which Jeffrey and I began talking about nearly a year ago. So we finally made it here. So what's my connection? In 1980, I was a sweet young thing living in LA, and I met a nice Jewish boy, and we got to talking. I said I was interested in the Holocaust, and he said, "Oh, that's all doom and gloom." Well, needless to say, that relationship never got very far. About 5 years later, I was living in Edmonton, Canada, and was involved with a second-generation group as a way to highlight that the Holocaust was not all doom and gloom. We became involved with Raoul Wallenberg's case. You'll remember he had come to Hungary in July 1944 to help the Jews of Budapest survive both the Germans and the Nazi-sympathizing Hungarian Arrow Cross. 6 months later, in January 1945, He was arrested by the Soviets and has not been heard from since. In 1985, our group was involved when Canada made Raoul Wallenberg an honorary citizen. The thought was that honorary citizenship would allow a Canadian legal team access to uncover his fate. It pointed to a bright light in all the doom and gloom of the Shoah. Perhaps as a way to combat that doom and gloom view, in 1963, Yad Vashem established the, quote, righteous among the nations to the few who helped Jews in the darkest time in their history. The righteous designation was conferred upon those who had risked their lives to save Jews. 30 years later, museum and exhibition curator Eric Saul established the Visas for Life program, an exhibit based originally on the Japanese consul in Kovno in 1940, Shion Sugahara. Saul eventually added more such righteous diplomats to his Visas for Life program. Yad Vashem now recognizes the designation of righteous diplomats and has honored them. The righteous diplomats were those who, although not necessarily risking their lives as they had diplomatic immunity, often did risk and damage their careers by in many cases going against their government's orders. And what did they do? They offered visas into or through their home countries, which allowed Jews to find sanctuary before and in some cases during the Second World War. In 2007, the Connecticut businesswoman and philanthropist Joyce Mandel saw Eric Saul's Visas for Life exhibit and was involved with bringing it to the University of Hartford. A few years before, Martin had published a book, The Righteous Unsung Heroes of the Holocaust, on those non-Jews who had saved Jews. He'd always intended to write about the diplomats. Joyce teamed with filmmaker Michael King, and they approached Martin to be the historical advisor on a film on these diplomats, which became The Rescuers, Heroes of the Holocaust, which hopefully you have seen or you can still view after. Michael came to us with the idea for the film. Martin always believed it's important to go to the places where historical events had happened. His preferred mode of transportation was by train, which in Europe is fairly easy. So that is how the journey unfolded. Michael King, who is African American, wanted to show that human inhumanity did not end with the Holocaust. And he brought in Stephanie Nyomberi, a Rwandan anti-genocide activist who had been studying in the States. Stephanie had lost family in the Rwandan genocide. She and her immediate family had survived solely because they were out of the country at the time. The premise of the film was that Martin would be researching the diplomats and Stephanie would be helping with the research. When I heard that Martin needed an assistant, I said, that would be me. In March 2009, we set off by train from London with Michael and his film crew. As Jeffrey said, we traveled through 10 countries on the trail of these diplomats. At nearly each location, we had with us a survivor who had been rescued, and in many cases, a descendant of the diplomat who had helped. At each place, Martin gave the historical background, the context of what was going on, and what efforts the diplomats had undertaken to help Jews. It was an amazing journey with, I believe, 150 hours of filming. The new Joyce D. Mandel Rescuers Collection will be showcased at the USC Shoah Foundation. Joyce and Michael are producing a second film, The Rescuers Last Chance Project, to film the stories of diplomats who were not covered in the original film. If any of you have family members or know of someone helped by diplomats, especially not those in the film you saw, please be in touch with me. And anyone whose family left Germany and Austria after 1933, or left Poland and Western Europe in 1940, your family left with transit visas and entry visas that came from a diplomat. For me, the trip was an opportunity to see behind the scenes, the nuts and bolts of making a film, and one that was mobile and mobilized every few days as we moved through various train stations to the next venue. I tried to stay well out of the way and yet be a source of support both to Martin and to other members of the crew. And of course, it was amazing to be in the places where history had taken place and to hear about it from Martin. The film crew itself was made up of people from diverse backgrounds. The producer-director, Michael King, and one of his co-producers are African American, along with his makeup lady. And of course, Stephanie is from Rwanda. The other co-producer is part Sioux Native American. The sound person had been born on a Japanese internment camp in Oklahoma. The director of photography was Polish-born, American-raised, and the director's assistant was originally from Haiti. In addition, there were 10 other members of the crew who dealt with various logistical issues, of which there were no shortage. I'd like to show you a few of my photos. I'll do it in the chronological order of when the diplomats were working and helping Jews escape imminent danger. The dates shown are when the diplomats were able to offer the greatest help. Now, if everyone will hold your breath, please, we'll see if I can get this right. This is very exciting. If so, it'll be the first time.
Little higher on the arrow.
I can't. Wait, let me try here. Ta-da!
Very good.
Fantastic. You can breathe now, everybody. Thank you for that. Frank Foley was the British passport officer in Berlin before the war. After 1935, his office saw an increased number of Jews applying to leave Germany. He was able to issue visas to British Mandate Palestine, the United Kingdom, and other British territories. We filmed in Berlin with the indomitable Inga Sampson. She didn't know that she and her family were, quote, those hated Jews until she was not allowed to join the Hitler Youth. She came home from school and found out that not only her father, but also her mother were Jewish. Her father, Oscar Fair, was a well-known eye doctor in Berlin. With Frank Foley's help, her family managed to get visas to Britain. It's important to remember that before the war, half of Germany and Austria's 650,000 Jews immigrated and survived. Each one of them had a visa which allowed them to get the documentation to leave Germany, and that visa came from a foreign diplomat. Recently, I heard a podcast on mandating Holocaust education, and the discussion turned to Anne Frank, and one of the commentators said, Anne Frank wasn't German, and I'm sitting there freaking out, yelling at my computer, yes, she was from Frankfurt. In fact, when things became bad in Frankfurt, her father Otto moved the family to Amsterdam. They were not the only German Jews who sought refuge in the Netherlands, in Belgium, and France. When the war began in 1939, the borders were sealed and movement in German occupied areas became virtually impossible. While filming in Berlin, we also visited the Grunewald station, which is the suburban train station from which the Jews of Berlin were deported. It's a very powerful memorial there with plaques along the railway siding showing the date, the number of Jews in each transport, and its destination. Aristide de Souza Mendes was the Portuguese consul general in Bordeaux when the Germans marched into Belgium, the Netherlands, and France in the summer of 1940. Refugees, especially Jews, flooded into Bordeaux. A Polish rabbi, Chaim Kruger, who had fled with his family to Antwerp, found themselves as refugees again, coming through Bordeaux. Rabbi Kruger met Souza Mendes and asked for help. Sousa Mendes offered visas through Portugal to Rabbi Kruger and his family. Rabbi Kruger said he would accept, but only if Sousa Mendes would do such visas for his entire family, all the Jewish refugees coming into Bordeaux. Unlike Frank Foley in Berlin, whose government in London was slightly more favorable to Jewish immigration, Sousa Mendes had strict instructions not to give visas to Jews. Sousa Mendes fought with his conscience and in the end issued thousands of visas to help Jews escape. At one point on the Spanish-French border town of Hendaye, Sousa Mendes drove his car slowly to this border crossing where Martin is standing. He had a group of Jews following on foot. He knew the Germans were in hot pursuit, and he also knew that this particular border crossing did not have a telephone, so the Germans couldn't alert the Spanish border guards to close the border. Where Martin is standing, his right foot is in Spain, and his left foot was in what was then German-occupied France. We were accompanied on the visit to Hendaye by Sebastian de Sousa Mendes, Aristide's grandson. Polish Jews, like Rabbi Kruger, had fled to Western Europe. Many more fled to the east, finding themselves in Soviet-occupied Eastern Europe. In the summer of 1940, it was the diplomats in Eastern Europe who were called upon to help. The Lithuanian diplomatic story is one of cooperation that was to help more than 2,000 Jews escape Poland ahead of the German invasion of what was then Soviet-occupied Lithuania in June 1941. According to the Yad Vashem citation, Persia Levin, a Dutch woman, and her Polish husband Isaac were refugees in Kovno, now Kaunas, the then capital of pre-war Lithuania. Persia appealed to help to LPJ de Decker, the Dutch ambassador in the Baltics in Riga. De Decker told her that a visa was not required for Curacao, Suriname, and other Dutch territories in the Caribbean. In fact, entry was at the discretion of the local Dutch governor, but de Decker did not put this into the stamp in her passport. Persia's husband then appealed to Jan Zwaardendijk, who was head of the Dutch company Philips in Kovno and handled Dutch consular affairs. Zwaardendijk did the same stamp that a visa was not required for Curacao. The Levins were then able to go to the Japanese consul in Kovno, Shion Sugihara, for a transit visa through Japan. In the film, both Sylvia Smaller and Beryl Shore accompanied us from Warsaw to Kovno and retold their stories of the help Jan Zwaardendijk and Shion Sugihara had given to allow them and their families to escape. There are very moving moments in the film when both Sylvia and Beryl find their names on the list of visa recipients at the Sugihara Museum. Interestingly, the Dutch governor at the time in Curacao said that had any Jews arrived, he would not have allowed them in. He admitted this when he was the Dutch ambassador to Israel. Luckily for all concerned, no Jews who were thus able to make their way across the Soviet Union and Japan ended up in Curacao. We will be hearing more about this dynamic duo, Jan Zwaardendijk and Shion Sugihara. And I'd just like to add that I believe I saw Zwaardendijk's grandson with us today, and thank you for coming. It's an honor to have you here. Back to France. Hendaye, where we were earlier, is near the English Channel. We now go to the French-Spanish border on the Mediterranean coast. Here we were accompanied by Michael Kaufman, who had been a child of 2 when his parents came through France to this border crossing at Port Bou. After the fall of France in June 1940, the American Rescue Committee was established to help German intellectuals and renowned figures, some of whom were Jewish, who had fled to France and were in danger of being arrested by the Germans. The American Varian Fry was sent to Marseille in August 1940 to find a way to get these people out of France. Among those he rescued was Michael Kaufman and his parents. In Michael Kaufman's group, when they crossed on foot into Spain at Portbou, was the German Jewish philosopher Walter Benjamin. With the Germans hot on their heels when they crossed the mountains on foot, the group heard rumors that the Germans would go to Portbou and be able to arrest the group and bring them back to France. Walter Benjamin so feared being captured that he committed suicide the night they reached Portbou. He's buried in the cemetery there. The Germans never reached them. The group were safe. Danny Caravan, an Israeli artist, has created a memorial to Walter Benjamin near the cemetery, which overlooks the coast. The memorial is called Passages and is a tunnel leading to the rocky ocean below. There's a very moving scene in the film with Stephanie and Michael Kaufman descending the steps to the bottom. While in Berlin, we filmed at the Wannsee Villa. I'd like to show you now a short 4-minute video clip from the rescuers of Martin there. In just these few moments, Martin gives the context of what was happening in the Holocaust, what was discussed at the meeting at the villa, and what was the result. January 20th, just 6 weeks ago, you will remember, was the 80th anniversary.
So this is the room where it all happened, and the fate of more than 3 million Jews was decided. The 20th of January 1942. Among the people who came here, Adolf Eichmann, he had been responsible for the first solution. He had been in Berlin, in Vienna, and Prague, supervising the emigration of more than 350,000 German and Austrian Jews. When war came in September 1939, other solutions were felt needed as almost 3 million Polish Jews came under German rule. And so this gentleman, Reinhard Heydrich, head of the SS Security Service, the SD, he thought up the second solution: put the Jews in ghettos and starve them to death over 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 years. That was a cruel solution. And here we have Dr. Rudolf Lange, one of the 8 doctors of jurisprudence who were at this meeting of 14 experts. Dr. Lange was one of those who participated in the third solution: mass murder with machine guns, murdering people town by town, village by village. And it was Lange who was one of those who led to the fourth and final solution. Because Lange complained to Berlin that shooting people with machine guns, shooting 50,000 people, they didn't have enough ammunition. It was a waste of ammunition. He said, my SS men don't like shooting at people of our German culture. They don't want to do it. Some of them have iron crosses. They won in the First World War for bravery fighting in the German army. We must find some other solution. And so Heydrich organized this meeting to decide on a final solution. And each one had a different part to play. They were discussing the methods of extermination. Should it be by gas. Each one had a different expertise. Should it be in trucks with gas vans? Each one was very particular. Round the Jews up in the streets of France and Holland and Belgium and Italy and Hungary, all over Europe, deport them great distances, send them by train somewhere in the east. No one need know what it is. It's unknown destination. And organize all the numbers on those lists, all they could find, all they could round up, all who couldn't hide. And in most of the death camps, all who arrived were murdered. There's no photograph in this chamber of horrors of the man who initiated it, Adolf Hitler. He said, Jewish question to be exterminated.
Interestingly, our fearless leader, Jeffrey, and he said he doesn't have a title, and I've now appointed him fearless leader, which he is. Jeffrey told me his grandfather, Alfred Giesener, believed that as he had been a decorated hero of the First World War, who fought bravely for Germany, he would be safe. But at this conference at the Wannsee Villa in January 1942, his fate was also sealed. He was deported from Berlin to the transit camp of Theresienstadt near Prague, where he was killed in May 1943. We now go to Copenhagen for a surprising story of cooperation and humanity. Following on from the Wannsee Conference and the establishment of transit camps in Western Europe in 1942, with deportation to the death camps, by 1943, it was the turn of the Danish Jews to be deported to their death. A Nazi German diplomat in Copenhagen, George Ferdinand Duckwitz, was appalled at the idea. When he found that the decision had been taken and was not going to be changed, he appealed to the Swedish Prime Minister to take in the Danish Jews. The Danish resistance organized the shipping of 7,200 Danish Jews in small fishing boats, like the one in my photo, under cover of darkness to Sweden. The brothers Leo and Gus Goldberger were among those saved with their family by George Duckwitz. The remaining 500 Danish Jews were deported, also to the transit camp of Theresienstadt near Prague. There, the Danish Red Cross was able to oversee their care. None were deported, and 423 survived. Along with George Duckwitz being honored by Yad Vashem, the Danish resistance is also honored for their help in rescuing the Danish Jews. Yad Vashem rightly lists each righteous Gentile with information on what was done to help Jews. Denmark has no individual names listed in the citation. The Danish resistance is honored as one. The Jews of Greece were deported to Auschwitz in the spring of 1943 and 1944. In July 1944, it became the turn of the Jews of the Greek islands of Kos and Rhodes. The Turkish consul in Rhodes, Selahattin Okerman, a Muslim, extended neutral Turkish protection to any members of a family if one member was a Turkish citizen. In the cases in which Turkish citizenship had lapsed, he renewed it. In this way, the Turiel brothers, Bernard and Elliot, and their parents were saved. The Jews of Rhodes were sent by ship to the mainland of Greece and then by train to Auschwitz. Because of the length of the journey, most who arrived were dead by the time the cattle cars were open. The Ibrahim Pasha Mosque is the oldest in Rhodes and was built in 1540. In the film, Okuman's son Mehmet is interviewed there. The Kahal Shalom Synagogue is the oldest in Greece and was believed to have been built in 1577. The synagogue is mainly a museum with the names inscribed of each of the Rhodes Jews who had been deported and killed. When we came, we arranged to have the shul open for us. It was only a few months after my mother had died, and I was keen to be in shul wherever I could to say Kaddish for her. It was Friday evening as we walked through the busy ancient Rhodes streets. Rhodes is a popular destination for Israelis, and we could hear Hebrew spoken everywhere. Martin stopped a group of young people and asked them if they would like to come to shul. One young man looked at us in surprise and said, "There's a shul here?" "I'm saying Kaddish," I said, and he threw up his hands and said, "It's a mitzvah." He gathered a group of his friends and we went to shul and he led the service. He had come from a Baghdadi family, and so we were treated to a Baghdadi Kabbalat Shabbat. In Budapest, we met Agnes Hirschi, who was the stepdaughter of Karl Lutz. Hungary had been allied to Germany, and Jews were relatively safe until Germany occupied it in March 1944. Systematically, Hungarian gendarmes rounded up and deported the Jews of the Hungarian provinces between April and July 1944 to Auschwitz. They then turned their attention to Budapest. A group of diplomats worked together to give the Jews of Budapest citizenship documents from their countries. Raoul Wallenberg had come, funded by the US War Refugee Board, which had been set up to help the Jews of Europe. And together with the diplomats, he created an international ghetto of safe houses where Jews could be protected. In July, the deportations were halted, but the Nazi sympathizing Arrow Cross began pulling Jews from their houses and wherever they could find them. They took them to the Danube River, they tied them together and shot the Jews into the river. A shoe memorial was created to symbolize the Jews who had been killed there, leaving only their shoes. And the tiny people in the photo is Michael King and Martin, far away from it. We also filmed at the Yosef Varosh railway station with Peter Vagi, who had been on the last deportation train and had been pulled off the train by Raoul Wallenberg. When the Germans left and the Soviet army moved into occupied Budapest, Raoul Wallenberg went to meet the Soviets. He and his driver were taken off. Both had expected to be back in Budapest within a matter of a few hours after their meeting. Neither were heard from again, and their fate really still is unknown. The Russians claimed he died in 1947 from a heart attack while in custody, but there has been no evidence presented to this day. And finally, to Israel. We filmed at Yad Vashem and in the Judean hills at sunrise. And now anytime I watch a film and there's this beautiful landscape with this amazing sunlight, I go, it was filmed at sunrise. I've learned something from this film trip. When I was looking through my files to prepare this, I found this map which Martin had made, which shows the places we visited and the people who either were descended from a diplomat or had been saved by them and who accompanied us and are in the film. The one thing to bear in mind with the story of the diplomats is that other than in a few cases, their decisions to help Jews and the window of opportunity for escape was very narrow. For Jews in Germany and Austria, there was potential for emigration up to September 1939, when the war broke out. For the Jews of German-occupied France, Aristide de Souza Mendes worked tirelessly for a few weeks to give visas to whoever asked. In Lithuania, it was a matter of weeks before the Soviet authorities closed their consular offices. In southern Vichy France, Varian Fry had more time, nearly 10 months, but his mandate was to save, quote, important people. In Denmark, it was also only a matter of a few weeks to arrange the rescue to Sweden. In Rhodes, it was only a matter of days. The diplomats in Budapest had 6 months after the threat of deportation had ceased, but they had to keep the Jews safe from the Arrow Cross. It's hard to imagine how even how decisions were made by the diplomats themselves and for those who decided to leave, what options were open to them. It certainly gives us pause when thinking of refugees today. I hope you have a chance to see the film and that this hopefully answered at least one or two of your questions. I'm happy to answer any remaining questions. Thank you all, and thank you to Jeffrey for doing this.
Before we go and get into your questions, I would like to pay tribute to some people in the audience. And so those of you who have your hands up, please go into your reaction button and lower your hand for me, please. This way I'll have a clean slate. And what I'd like to do is that we have survivors in the audience with us who in many ways are the eyewitnesses for us to be able to be engaged with. And I would like them to be able to go in to the reactions button and raise their hands so that we can see them and I can honor them. I see Zelda Fixman, so why don't you raise and say hello to me?
Can I just say here that
Yep.
because of Jeffrey did a shidduch and Zelda was speaking at his last event, and she mentioned that she was from Ukraine, and because of Jeffrey, I was in touch with her, and Zelda was born in the same town that my mother was born in. And unfortunately, my mother's gone. Zelda was a child, but we connected, and it's been amazing for me this week. I've been on such a high knowing Zelda.
And Jeffrey, I must state, even being a child, knowing the connection to the town where my family comes from is like a rebirth of myself. And Esther, I am honored to meet you and share the history of Sarne. And I'm going to read your translation. Thank you so much for what you're doing.
Thank you.
Okay, so if we have other survivors, I know Benjamin Midler is in the audience with us. Please raise your hand or hit the raise hand on the reactions button so I can find you in the screens. We have Ursula Duba, who doesn't consider herself a survivor, but she is a very close friend of mine, new friend, and she has written many books. And she is someone that you all would want to know. And I just love Ursula. And Benjamin, can you raise your voice so we can hear you, and then you'll come on screen.
My name is Benjamin Midler, and I'm a survivor from 6 concentration camps.
Thank you. And where were you born?
I was born in Poland, 1928. I was 15 years old when I went into concentration camps, starting Majdanek, Bligin, Birkenau, Sachsenhausen, Noordhof, and Babelsberg.
Very nice. And I'm so happy and honored that you're with us. Do we have any other survivors with us? Please raise, oh, Jackie, I just saw you. Jackie Young is with us. Please say hello to the crowd and tell us a little bit about yourself.
Hello there. Well, as a survivor, but I was one of the very, very young ones, so I have no recollection. So in some respect, I fall into the second generation more than the first, because all that I found out is by research on my background.
Well, tell the audience a little bit about how old you were, what camp you were.
Well, I was put in an orphanage by whom I do not know in Vienna. I was born in Vienna, 1812-41, and I was there for a few months till the Gestapo, I've got all the documents to show it, found me there and sent me to the camp Theresienstadt, where I stayed for 2 years, 8 months, from a 9-month-old baby. And the Russians liberated it in May the 8th, 45. And a few months in just outside Prague with a load of other people, as kids we were, and then we were flown over by bombers, Sterling bombers, to the UK, and that's where I grew. And my past really came to me in 3 major revelations. One from a kid in school at about 6, 7, told me I was adopted, which I didn't know at that time. And then I found out from my adopted grandmother that she said I was Austrian. And then the biggest shock was that when we got married, I had to prove that I was Jewish. And my mother, my adopted mother, had the papers, who was reluctant to give them up, but she eventually did. And that's when I found out I'd been in Theresienstadt for all those years. Why and how I survived, I can only say thank you to the, well, I never was able to say thank you to the people that made me survive. That's about the size of it. And besides that, I've had a wonderful life.
All right, well, thank you. And what I want to do, Esther, I'm going to flip a little bit on you. I want to, since so many people haven't seen the film, I think it was so great to see what you've done. We'll play a 2-minute trailer, give everyone a little bit of a breather, and then we'll go and ask for some questions for you, and then we'll turn it over to Arlette. So here we go. Let's see if I can get this thing started. There we go.
Kigali has been the center of the fiercest fighting in the Civil War. The United Nations has been able to do very little to help these people.
As a Rwandan and an anti-genocide activist who lost many members of my family to genocide, I could not think of a better project to be part of than one that shows how all of us can make a difference.
My father was a young diplomat in 1943. My father was told to stop giving these passports and helping the Jewish community escape the island.
German planes.
My mother was thrown to the ground and she died the following Saturday.
Lupfitz, a member of the Nazi Party, had by his efforts organized the rescue of 7,200 people. An amazing feat of goodness from someone who had been trained in the art of evil.
I feel so peculiar standing here with you because you're alive. It is terrible that so many people had to die, where 600,000 Jews lived before, and at the end of the war, 90,000 has left to live.
You don't connect these bureaucratic actions to the actual saving of a life.
Yeah, not when you see you, though.
What would you say to Frank Foley today if you met him?
Thank you for saving our lives. Thank you.
When you reflect on the Diplomats, the phrase, the mystery of goodness, is it a mystery, or do you think goodness is actually a deep-seated human virtue which emerges?
I know there can be hope. I've learned that when we see crimes against humanity, we cannot turn the other way. Instead, we must transform our fears into courage to take action.
And this film is available to you. It was special.
Verizon is going ultra, and so is our best unlimited plan ever with 5G ultra wideband.
Sorry about that. The film is available to us through the kindness of Michael King. The URL is in the invitation that you received. And
now in many more cities and up to 10.
What's going on here? Hold on 1 second, sorry. And Michael has given us permission to use that URL, and he has a temporary password. So I advocate that you go and see this film. It is as much, it has really the power behind it that you're seeing in the trailer. So you will be educated as Esther is. And I want you all to pay attention also to all of the books that sit behind Esther. And she has an amazing retention. She's now my mentor historian. I go to Esther and boy, I ask Esther a question and I get a URL or a link almost instantaneously. She has like a photographic mind, has memorized the 80 books that Sir Martin has written in his life, plus all of the other various pamphlets. And she sent me a pamphlet the other day, 35-page pamphlet. She calls it a pamphlet. I think that's like a little bit of an ebook, you know. So I want to now turn the audience to you, Esther, and if anybody has any questions about your presentation, please again use the reactions button and raise your hand, and we will be happy. And then Dana, Dr. Dana, maybe you can, which is Dr. Dana Schrager. She's my pal. She's a psychologist in LA and who's zooming in from there. She will be able to help me see any questions. Anybody have any questions on the movie or what you presented to Esther before we move over to Arlette?
Can I just say that Ruth has asked everyone. Okay, she asked me about Clark Husted, and I just looked in Martin's two of Martin's indexes, and I couldn't find anything. And I looked on the Yad Vashem website, and they don't have anything. So
and Ruth, can you unmute yourself and so we can hear you and see you on screen?
Yes, can you hear me now?
We can hear you, yes.
Here I am.
Okay. And so
Well,
why don't you ask what your question was?
Oh, I asked first Esther, but then I did it again to everyone, whether anyone knows anything about Clark Husted, Husted. I don't know that he was a diplomat. He may have been an official in an office, but I have a document signed by him among the very few documents I have. I am a child survivor. I'm the last one in my family born abroad. My younger sister was born 7 years later in the United States. So I was very young at the time. And I know very much a patchwork of my own story. And I was just wondering if anyone knew anything about this man and what he may have done other than sign this document.
what's the document, Ruth? Where were you from?
Well, I was born in Czechoslovakia in 1938, and my history is one of 3 years of flight and hiding, mostly with my parents, not every minute, but mostly. And we went through the Caribbean also and arrived in New York ultimately in June of 1941. So the first 3 of my 5 formative years were in flight, in hiding, and that kind of history.
If you can send me a scan of the document, maybe we can sort of tease out a little bit about it.
Right, I'll have to excavate it. I will do that. Is your email address somewhere?
Yes, Jeffrey has it.
Yeah,
or you
so-
can reach me through martingilbert.com.
Okay, thank you. Thank you.
Okay, so is there any, I see some hands up here. So I see Arnold, I see Zelda, and I see Donna, and I see Robert. If everyone is ready to ask those questions, we'll take them from left to right on my screen. So Robert, why don't you unmute yourself and please ask the question.
He has to unmute. He's muted.
Yes, Robert, you have to unmute, please. Okay, we'll come back to you. How about Donna? Can you unmute, please? Donna, can you hear me?
Unmute.
You have to unmute. Okay, we'll come back to you. Zelda, go ahead.
I just wanted to say to Esther, I think you mentioned in your presentation that you're looking for people that were saved by the diplomats. Here in Boca Raton, a Chabad rabbi, Zalman Buket, his father was one of the yeshiva boys that was saved by Sugihara. And Rabbi Buket's family, from this one saved teenager, a yeshiva bocher, his family grew to over 100. So if you need to speak to him, it's kind of interesting, his father's story.
Yeah, indeed. And Sugihara is covered in the film. The second film is really on diplomats who weren't covered in the first one. And
Okay,
very
well, it's up to you.
have come up. Can I just say, you asked if I can take a moment. Were there any American diplomats that circumvented the American quota system and saved Jews? I don't know, but I just want to tell you a very quick story that Zelda will appreciate, and hopefully others will also. My mother got papers and was in Moscow to take the Trans-Siberian Railway in April 1941. And she was she had all the papers and all the documents, and she was at the American embassy, and she needed $3 and no one at the embassy would change money for her. And she had to go and change it on the black market. When I was little and I heard the story, I had no idea what the black market was. And I was terrified. She was 23 at the time and traveling by herself. And she was pretty terrified. Anyway, so that's the story I grew up with. When Martin and I were in Sarny in August 2011, and we went to change some money, and there's an instant teller at one of these machines, and they gave money out in Ukrainian hryvnias and American dollars. And I thought, oh, if only my mother had seen that she could get American dollars in Sarny, she would never have believed it. Anyway, if there are more questions.
Arnold and Barbara, I see your hand is up. Please unmute yourself.
I think can you hear me? I think I am
Yes.
muted. Yes, okay. My question is there an update on the advocate from Darfur and what she's doing now and what how her participation enhanced the project?
Michael King, the director's idea was that it would enhance, her being there would enhance the project, and also it would bring in a younger audience, and it would sort of widen the interest in rescuers by saying that this is still issues that are going on. If you see the film, she asks some very pointed questions to some of the diplomats who we visited. She's now working in the Rwandan government for the prime minister, whose name I think I can almost see, but I'm not sure I could pronounce. So she I think she came from a very politically active family. I don't know, but she's become, last I heard, she was working for the Rwandan government. And she's a very, very bright, lovely lady. And it was really wonderful to have her with us.
And if I can say something, not only is the movie talking about the diplomats of the era, but they also brought in the diplomats of the current period. And this woman that we're talking about, the associate from Rwanda, asks those current diplomats about genocide today and how politicians can break the cycle. And it's very interesting dialogues that are happening at that level. So Donna, I want to make sure I don't miss you. Are you still interested in asking us a question? Because your hand is raised in the icon. So are you able to unmute? I can't hear you. You have to hit the unmute button in your dashboard. It's right on the very left side on your screen. There should be a microphone and you probably have a line through it. So I'm starting to hear some scratches.
Jeffrey?
Yes.
I wondered, I was going to add to Barbara's, when we have the
Okay,
frame.
this is Arnold. Arnold, go ahead. Why not, Arnold?
Yes, I just wanted to say,
give us a little background on who you are so everyone knows who you are.
Well, the former CEO of Jewish Family Service in Los Angeles.
Okay,
I just wanted to say how much I appreciated Esther's presentation, but add that I think when you all get a word from Jeffrey about encouraging you to see the film in advance. Seeing the film as we did before we heard Esther, the two complemented each other so beautifully. And I feel that we're all the richer because we did see the movie in advance of the presentation. And I can't help but compliment or comment on that moment in the film with Martin. I don't want to go into it because I don't want to take from those who didn't see it, but he's a man who seemed to be in so much in control throughout, but a tear was shed, and it was very touching for anybody that was watching that. And I just wanted to mention.
I'll second that, Arnold.
Can I just say something? It was a very cold day when we were filming at the station, and I went out and took a few pictures, but by the time they got ready to start filming, I said, forget it, I'm sitting in the bus. So I sat in the bus with a few other people, and Martin came back and he was very upset. He was very angry with himself. And it's funny, this morning I felt, there's always questions we don't ask. And I never asked him what happened, and how he felt about it. I know he felt bad when I saw that clip, the film, I knew he felt badly because he had been upset. And it's sort of, what happened was he connected what had happened to his family. And Martin left, Martin was evacuated, as many British children were, to various different parts of the UK. And as a 3-year-old, he was evacuated to Canada for 3 years. He lived in Toronto with a foster family. His parents stayed in London. And he always connected, I think, with the children and with those who had been killed and who had lost their lives. Among them, there were cousins. But he also understood that he wasn't a survivor. He hadn't gone through traumatic experiences. He hadn't been in danger. So, and his writing is always very, this is what happened, without bringing himself into it. And that is one moment in the film where he allows the idea that here one survivor had survived, and where was Wallenberg to help his family? Where was the Wallenberg to help his family? And it is a very moving moment. And I feel badly now that I didn't sort of discuss it with him more. But he was British. He wasn't one to talk about his feelings.
Right.
I feel that it was the most important moment in the movie because it gave everyone permission that's easy to feel. And it's what we need to do. We learn the facts, but to feel the sadness, the horror of it. I think that was extremely important. And I think any of your questions, I guess you can kind of extrapolate, what he was feeling. And we can all understand ourselves better as well and how we relate to this whole situation. Because it's not enough just to know it intellectually. We've got to feel this to make an impact on our lives and to make us want to help other people in current genocidal situations.
Thank you. I hope somewhere he's listening and heard that and feels better. But he brought in the voices of the survivors in his work to give that emotional connection and human connection.
Well, I know firsthand the work that you're doing, Esther. He sees it every day and he's so pleased.
I keep reminding him.
Okay, I'm going to take the program away from Esther for a little bit, and I want to introduce Arlette. And Arlette is coming to us from The Hague in the Netherlands. Arlette, however, was born in New York, and she's a first-generation American. She was raised in Paris, moved back to New York, been living in The Hague, the Netherlands, for nearly 50 years. She came as a visitor, and she blew her return KLM ticket by one day by not counting the time difference and the flight number. So what happened? She stayed there forever. She taught English as a second language, or she calls it English as a stupid language, at the American School for The Hague for 35 years. She went on a permanent vacation 4 years ago and been writing her book day and night ever since. She's learned to speak Italian, play klezmer music on the accordion with her husband, who plays the banjo. She loves, loves, loves animals, and she has several cats who are in her Zooms all the time with her. They are both vegans. They have 2 cats, 2 step cats. I'm sorry, 2 step kids and 3 grandkids. And I never knew anything about the war on my family's history until 4 years ago. So I am very proud to bring to the presentation my really good friend, Arlette. And Arlette, why don't you give me a second? I'll fire up your presentation and we'll get started. Okay, you should be able to see my screen. And hold on a minute. Okay. All right, Arlette, why don't you take over?
I unmuted myself. Thank you so much, Jeffrey. And thank you in advance for doing the slides for me. I'm a complete tech poop, so I can't do 2 things at once. So I really appreciate this. I'm going to talk about 3 things. Briefly introduce how I got started on writing my book, and then explain my family's escape from Poland and the 2 rescuers who made that possible. So to start off, I was never interested in my family history. My grandfather died when I was 6. I only asked my father about his war experiences once or twice. I was very indifferent. It's not that it was a taboo subject in our house like it is in many homes. My parents were not in the camps. My grandparents were not in the camps. It was just this complete indifference on my part. And then 45 years ago, I saw the TV series, The Holocaust with Meryl Streep. I know that Elie Wiesel thought it was insulting, but for me, it was kind of traumatic. And since that day, I haven't been able to watch any scary Holocaust movies or read any scary Holocaust books or anything scary on any subject for that matter. And it really made a big impact on me because also since that day, I've been having kind of dreamlike state trances where I'll think of these horrors in the Holocaust, 5 or 10 or 20 times a day, wherever I am, whatever I'm doing, especially when I'm trying to fall asleep at night. And they're really, really scary. And I don't know where they're coming from. It's like I'm being hijacked by someone else's memories. It's not anything that I've experienced. So I kept that really, really tightly, a secret. Never spoke to anyone about it. I was very ashamed. Shame is crippling. I was afraid one day somebody would say, hey, what are you thinking about? And I'd say, well, I'm thinking of, some horror experiment. And they'd say, well, you're nuts. So I never spoke to anyone about it. And then 4 years ago, I read an article in The Guardian about an interview with Dan Glass, a young man in England, who explained that parents and grandparents who raise their children talking about the Holocaust horrors are actually doing the children a disservice. And these children grow up damaged and traumatized. And he spoke about 2G and 3G, second and third generation. I'd never heard those terms before, and I'd never heard of anything he spoke about because it was all 100% new for me. And it all resonated. So I contacted him and he wrote back immediately and he asked me to share with him whatever I wanted to. And what I'd never told anyone, I told this complete stranger. And I told him a list of all my nightmares, but in the daytime, like daymares. And he was very, very kind. And he again responded immediately and said he had 2 pieces of advice for me: to talk to my husband about it, which I'd never done. I didn't want to worry him, and to write. So I did that. And when I wrote, it fit on 1 page. It was half a page. And I put it in my drawer thinking I was done. I wrote 4 sentences. I wrote that I knew my family came from a town in Poland that started with a B. I wrote there was a man from Philips who helped my family. My grandmother and aunt got out of Siberia. And I think that was it. And then I asked my brother Roger, he told me a little bit more. I asked the 2 daughters of my aunt, they told me a little bit more. So now I had about 2.5 pages. And I put it in my drawer, certain I was done because everybody else was dead. I had no one left to ask. And then it sort of grew into a tree on its own because what happens, I started reading. a lot. I read from 5 in the morning till 3 in the morning for 4 years straight. When I started, I knew nothing. I didn't know when the war started. I didn't know anything about Poland. In high school, I never heard the word Holocaust. In the 60s, I learned about the Civil War. That was about it. I never took a writing class in high school. It was really a joke in those days. I never took a class on how to do research. I was starting from rock bottom. So I started reading, and taking a lot of notes. And I read about epigenetics, the transfer of trauma through the DNA and transgenerational trauma. And even though I was very skeptic, all this stuff really resonated. So I'd like to share with you now what I learned about my my family, and everything I'm telling you now, I had no idea ever before this started. So to begin, this is a picture of my grandfather on the right, that's Abraham, and his daughter Yadzia, my grandmother Chava, and my father Jacques. And one day after the Germans invaded Poland, they escaped. So that would be September 2nd, 1939. They were living in a town called Benjin. And my grandfather escaped with his brother, one of his 8 siblings, Shmuel, and his son Salek, and his brother's wife, and then his wife and daughter. So the 6 of them left. And that was 2 days before the Germans reached their town of Benjin. And I think he left, I think he had this foresight because he had read Mein Kampf, he knew what Hitler was capable of. He knew that from the hostage taking during World War I, he was a very active Zionist, and he was concerned that he might be one of the first arrested. So they leave Benjin, they start off in Warsaw, and they make their way, like, you know, many refugees did, sleeping in the woods, etc. And they end up in Lvov, which is present-day Lviv in Ukraine. And things are going well there. And then my grandfather bumps into an ex-employee on the street, and he gets very, very worried because in his town of Benjin, he was part owner of a bicycle parts factory. And if his employee would report to him in Lvov, for the communists, being a capitalist was like a crime worse than murder. So he leaves immediately, and he leaves his wife and daughter behind because Lvov feels safe. And he heads to Lithuania. And he waits till New Year's Eve, hoping the border guards will be drunk, which they were. But it was an incredibly cold winter. I think 57 below Fahrenheit, 47 below centigrade. And he loses a toe to frostbite. And he reaches Vilnius. And he must have been familiar because as a younger student, his father had sent him there to study in the yeshiva, even though he was not religious. And then he makes his way to Kaunas, and he goes to the 2 consuls, which I will be explaining shortly in part 3. So the first consul, Jan Svartendijk, gives him a fake visa to Curaçao. I'm putting it in a nutshell now. The second consul, Shiun Siguhara, gives him a 10-day transit visa to Japan. Then he goes to the Soviet NKVD office, that's a precursor of the KGB, and he gets an exit permit to leave the Soviet Union. And then he goes to what's called Intourist and buys a ticket on the Trans-Siberian Railroad for either $180 up to $400. It depended on if you got a hotel or meals on the train, etc. So he leaves, he gets to Moscow, he gets on the Trans-Siberian. It's an 11-day journey to cross the Soviet Union, and he gets to Vladivostok. That's the port at the end, the harbor. The other Jewish Polish refugees get off the train and make a beeline for the ship to Japan. They've heard of the pogroms and they don't want to be near the NKVD, the KGB. And if the ship to Japan is not ready and they have to wait 1 or 2 days, they go in the hotel or they hide in someone's basement, but they disappear. And my grandfather, who, I must backtrack, 3 things were happening simultaneously while he was in Lithuania getting visas for himself and his wife and his daughter, even though they were not with him. His wife and daughter in Lvov were given a choice by the Soviets. Do you wish to remain here and become a Soviet citizen, or do you wish to go back home, which is German occupied section? And they checked that side because my grandmother thought, you know, I miss my home, I want to go back. I haven't heard anything bad happening there. And that was a trick. So they were sent to Siberia with tens and tens of thousands of other Jews who had checked the wrong box. And it's most likely what saved their lives. So they're in Siberia. My grandfather is getting them visas. And my father, who wanted to go to university, but as a Jew, could not be accepted into a Polish university. That was rare. Goes to study in Liège in Belgium. And as the Germans are advancing, he escapes on his own, crosses Belgium, crosses France, and goes to the coast of France. And he sees a ship in the distance, and there's a rowboat going back and forth. And now it's the last rowboat. It's the last trip back and forth. And there's tons of people who are pushing and shoving and dying to get on this last rowboat. But you had to be on a special list to get on. I believe they were Polish officers. And the last one gets on, and they start to untie the rowboat, and my father jumps in and throws a tarp over his head. And in that split second, nobody saw. And he feels the rowboat moving to the ship. He climbs aboard, now he's safe. It's heading to the UK. And he hears about de Gaulle's Free French Forces, and he signs up as volunteer number 87. So now he's in the army for 5 years, the Free French Forces, he's stationed in Northern Africa, Palestine, Paris during liberation. So that's where my father is, while my grandfather is in Vladivostok. So everybody else who gets off the train goes into hiding, waiting for the ship to Japan. And my grandfather says, I'm not going anywhere without my wife and daughter. And he goes straight into the NKVD office, the KGB office, and he's waiving his permits and his visas that he has. And he's insisting that the Soviet government made a mistake. His wife and daughter do not belong in Siberia because look here, I have a permit for them to come with me to Japan. And so he's going there for months, constantly, and he's getting nowhere. And the legend that was handed down to us children is that the officer, I believe a lieutenant, working in the KGB, wearing a leather jacket, carrying a Luger, was a woman, a female lieutenant. And she, according to this legend, had a crush on my grandfather, who was very tall, blue eyes, blonde hair, did not look Jewish. And she's flirting with him. And this is going on for months. And it's like, comrade, why you want to go to America? They're capitalist. And here is the greatest country in paradise. Sorry, my Russian accent is terrible. But finally, he thinks on his toes and he makes up a quick lie. And he says, look, I'm a religion teacher. I cannot practice my trade in your country. And she goes, oh, okay. And she sends a telegram to the main office in Moscow. And the next thing you know, they have a soldier accompanying my grandmother and aunt on the train to Vladivostok. Takes them a couple of weeks. And they meet my grandfather after 1 year of being separate. And they're the only two Jews, the first two Jews to get out of Siberia, while the Germans had a pact with the Soviets. After that pact was broken, many, many, many prisoners were released, but at this time they were the only two. So they take the train to Japan, and they're warmly welcomed by Polish ambassador Tadeusz Romer, who's a huge hero in my book. And he wants to interview them and get answers because he wants to know about the Polish prisoners that are in Siberia. These are the first two to get out, and they can answer some of his questions because there was no mail allowed, of course. So he offers my aunt a voluntary job in the embassy, the Polish embassy. And she later said how in Poland, as a Jew, she wouldn't be allowed in the embassy. Here she is allowed to work there. So she was very, very tickled. And he issues them a Polish passport, and he gets for them Canadian visas. And he's doing this for hundreds and hundreds of refugees, not just regardless of religion. He's truly a great hero. He was doing this by very diplomatically bugging all the embassies there, the legations, the consulates, and getting them visas for at least 1,000 people for Canada, the United States, Australia, some countries in South America. Some of the people got it themselves, but he got it for hundreds. And when Japan was getting ready to bomb Pearl Harbor, they moved all the remaining Jews, about 1,000. I'm rounding off all the numbers here, let's say close to 860. They get moved to Shanghai, and Tadeusz Romer goes with them, with his staff and family. So he's just a great, great man. So My family is very lucky. They have a visa. They get on the ship called the Himaru. My grandfather gets off in Seattle, Washington, and he gets put in detention by the American immigration. And I'm not sure why. And he's kept there a few months. Some Zionists in New York vouched for him, and he got out, was released, and moved to New York. And my grandmother and aunt continued to Canada because they have the visa. And 2 years later, they can join my grandfather, and they all live in New York. And my father, who's finished the 5 years of service, hadn't seen them before because he was studying in Belgium. And then he had to wait quite a long time for an American visa. So he meets them in New York after 8 years of separation. So that's the story of my family's escape. Every survivor story is unique. Every survivor had luck and everyday luck and more luck and lots of luck and determination, resilience, chutzpah, the help of strangers. But you could say a lot of these same things about the millions who were murdered. You could say the 1.5 million children who were murdered, a lot of them had resilience. So a lot of ordinary people with extraordinary stories, but given that every survivor story is unique, and that includes many of you sitting there, what I consider to be unique about my family's escape was the percentage of luck. When my grandfather left his town of Benjin, he was in the 3% to get out. When he left, 25,000 Jews were murdered, and 69 of them were in my family, so my great-grandparents, my great-aunts and uncles. When he got out of Lithuania, he was in the 1%. 212,000 Jews were slaughtered by the Lithuanians and the Germans. And when he got his wife and daughter out of Siberia, they were the only two, so you can't speak of a percentage. The number would be minute. So that's the story of my grandparents' escape. And I would like to tell you a little bit about the consuls who saved his life. So when I started on my journey 4 years ago, I went to see a Japanese movie presented here in The Hague by the Japanese embassy. This is where I live. And it was called Persona non grata, the story of Sugihara. And I didn't know much at all. And I sat there and it was very, very Hollywoody, a lot of violins, and I was crying. And I got up as soon as the movie was over, I got up and I started to walk out. And the people at the door closed the door and said, "Everyone, please remain seated. So we're going to hand out a form and we'd like you to fill this in before you leave." So I sat down and I got the form. It was multiple choice. They handed out a pen and they said, it was basically, now that you've seen the movie, how do you feel? Have you changed your mind about how you feel about the Japanese government? Something like that. And it made me really, really uncomfortable. But I really wanted to leave, but the door was closed. So I just checked everything quickly and I got up and left. Jeffrey, maybe you could show like a few slides and then I'll continue and then we'll do another few slides because I'm very bad at stopping and remembering. So, okay, perfect. Thank you, Jeffrey. On the right is Dan Glass, the one who gave the interview for The Guardian 4 years ago, which started me on this entire journey. And on the left was just a typical visual that I would have the whole day thinking of these types of horrors for the last 45 years. Okay, next. Benjin, where it all began, you can see the yellow letter, 25 miles northwest of Auschwitz. Okay. This is a picture of my father when he was in the army. He's the first one on the right. He was stationed near Morocco here. He had been studying engineering, so they were blowing up bridges and setting up bridges. Thank you, Jeffrey. That was the Trans-Siberian track. And I think it was 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. The fifth little dot from the left is where my aunt and grandmother were in Siberia, north of that. So when my grandfather took the train, he actually passed where they were. Okay, next. My great hero, Tadeusz Romer. And his daughter is here this evening. Hi, Rania. I saw your name. I was so happy. One of the wonderful friends I've made. Next. Oh, this is the questionnaire. One of the two questions out of, I don't know, 20 or so. After I saw the movie Persona non grata. Okay, so maybe one more slide and then we can leave there. Okay, perfect. Thank you, Jeffrey, so much. So this is, I'll start with the story of Jan Zwartendijk. He was the Dutch director of Philips in Kaunas, Lithuania. And on May 10th, 1940, the Netherlands was occupied by the Germans. And on May 10th, on the same exact day, the Dutch consul in Lithuania resigned. He had a conflict of interest because he had a German background and German business. So now Lithuania had no consul, but it did have an ambassador. His name was De Decker, and he was in another Baltic state. He was in Riga, Latvia. And Ambassador De Decker asked Jan Zwartendijk if he would please be honorary consul, volunteer consul. And Jan Zwartendijk must have realized that there wouldn't be much work because there was only a handful of Dutch citizens living in Lithuania. So what's the most that could happen is one of them might need a passport renewed one day. And he agreed. And the very next day, the Soviets invaded Lithuania massively, all three Baltic states. So that's part one. Part two is a Dutch yeshiva student named Nathan Goodworth, Tels Yeshiva. And Nathan Goodworth does not wish to remain stranded in Lithuania now that the Soviets have occupied, and he cannot return to the Netherlands because the Nazis have occupied it. So he wants to get a visa to leave, but he's in no big hurry to leave because his bride-to-be is waiting for her passport. And he's friends with Jan Zwartendijk because, you know, there's such few Dutch people there, so they know each other. And Jan Zwartendijk sends him his Dutch newspapers when he's done with them, and they have this common love of Dutch soccer, Nederlands football. So this yeshiva student contacts Jan Zwartendijk and Ambassador De Decker, and asks please for a visa to Curaçao. Curaçao is a small Dutch colony in the Caribbean. And Ambassador De Decker says, I cannot issue you a visa to Curaçao because no Curaçaos are given. It doesn't exist. It's up to the goodwill of the local governor. And to be honest, he usually says no to everybody. And yeshiva student Nathan Goodworth gets creative and thinks outside of the box and suggests a different wording. How about you write, no visa is required instead of no visa is given? And Ambassador De Decker considers this, goes along with it, and asks Jan Zwartendijk to please do so, because they're 266 kilometers apart. One is in Riga and one is in Kaunas. So Jan Zwartendijk has a very fancy official looking rubber stamp made up in French, the language of the diplomats, and it says visa to Curaçao, not required, of course, mentions nothing about the local governor. And he issues this to Nathan Goodworth and two of Nathan Goodworth's Dutch friends at the yeshiva and Nathan Goodworth's bride-to-be. Now, what he does, he goes next, the yeshiva student, Nathan Goodworth, goes next to a very influential man that he knows by the name of Warhaftig. Warhaftig knows everybody, has a lot of contacts, he's a lawyer. He later becomes Minister of Religion in Israel. And Warhaftig suggests something brilliant. He says to Nathan Goodworth, can you go back to Consul Jan Zwartendijk and ask if he will issue the same visa to the others who are not Dutch? And Nathan Goodworth goes back and asks Jan Zwartendijk, and Jan Zwartendijk, without asking Ambassador De Decker, this he's doing completely on his own now, says, I will issue this visa to anyone who shows up at my door. Nathan Goodworth relays the message to Warhaftig, and Warhaftig spreads the news like wildfire. He goes to shtetls and cities and the countryside. He goes to yeshivas. He goes to the Mir yeshiva. And because of this, all 300 survive, the rabbis and the students. It's the only yeshiva in the entire World War II that survives intact. So now you get the lines outside of the consuls. You get, hundreds of people lined up, thousands of people. And in the 11 days that Jan Zwartendijk is allowed to remain open because the Soviets are closing all the businesses. In those 11 days, he issues 2,345 fake visas. It's an easy number to remember because it's 2, 3, 4, 5. Because Nathan Goodworth has suggested just write down no visas required, but normally you'd get a visa that said a visa. If there's no visa, you wouldn't get a stamp, but this was a visa that said no visa. So it was completely crazy. It was a scam that worked. It's amazing, but it worked. So the people would get their visas from Jan Zwartendijk and next go to Shiuni Sugihara, the Japanese consul, and he would stamp them a 10-day transit visa to Japan. You have to remember these people could not go to Europe, that was the war. They couldn't go to Palestine because the British made it so difficult, but they could, and they knew they weren't going to Curaçao. They'd never even heard of Curaçao, but it was explained to them. But this was a way of getting one foot out of Lithuania, at least escaping Lithuania and taking their chances in Japan, where they could approach all the different embassies and legations, etc., and take their chances there. So they line up at the office of Sugihara. He gives them a 10-day transit. Unfortunately, many people didn't do all this because they didn't want to leave their families behind, or their families were elderly, whatever. So that was very sad that more could have escaped. And then, like my grandfather, they all went to the NKVD and got their exit permit. And then they all went to the Intours and had to pay $180 per person, up to $400, according to different sources. And they were terrified because it could be a trick. You know, the banks were closed. Foreign valuta was illegal. Having $1 US would get you sent to Siberia. They were penniless, and they're supposed to bring $180 to $400 per person. Of course, the Jewish organizations were helping like joint. If not, this never could have happened. So a lot of them thought it was a trick. Nobody to this day knows why Stalin allowed it. And they were afraid of getting sent to Siberia and being considered as traitors. So even on that, you know, stage, many people could have been saved that weren't. So then they did the same as my grandfather. They got on the train, they took the boat, they went to Japan. And the story that Esther mentioned of Pesla Lewin Sternheim, I should mention, she was a Dutch citizen who married a Polish man. She had a 3-year-old son, a Dutch mother, and a Dutch brother studying at the yeshiva. And she had contacted Ambassador De Decker and asked for a visa to the East Indies, which is Indonesia. And he had said, no, that's not possible, but he explained Curaçao. And she sent him the passport, he stamped it, and he asked Jan Zwartendijk to stamp it for her husband and mother and brother, which he did. So she went straight to Shion Sugihara, and as a result, she's one of the very low numbers, like number 5, I believe. So as a result, many people think that she was the first one to do this, and her family really promoted this. Her, you know, Pesla's husband wrote a book, and they've been interviewed, a lot of newspaper articles, etc. Whereas the family of Nathan Goodworth is very low key and very modest, and they haven't really talked about this much. But like I said, Nathan Goodworth had to wait for his bride-to-be to get the passport. He would not leave without her. So by the time he was ready to go to Sugihara, he was like number 1,000. But for me, it doesn't really matter who was first. I'm just telling you what I've read a lot. For me, what's important is that whereas Pesla got it for the family of 5, thanks to Nathan Goodworth, over 2,500 people got this visa. So he's one of the great, great heroes. So, so that's the story of the consuls. And I'm reading all this, and I'm getting a little frustrated because all the stories are, a lot of it isn't meshing, and there's firsthand accounts that are contradicting other, you know how history works. There's forgetting, there's memory problems. Even in my family, there's firsthand accounts that don't really, they contradict each other. There's disappeared documents. For example, Jan Zwartendijk had to burn all his documents before he left because it was, you know, really dangerous for him otherwise, where she and Sugihara could take his list. The harbor in Japan where the boat went to was bombed a few times by the Americans, so those records disappeared with the numbers. But so it was really hard to get black and white, you know, facts. There was a lot of disagreeing, but little by little, the more I'm reading, the more I was getting puzzled and by the contradictions and getting a little bit more critical of the discrepancies. And I found many, many unreliable claims. And after a while, I just thought, these facts that are being distorted, some of these are just outright lies. And to give you just one example, the figures themselves, that the books will say Shiun Sugihara issued 2,139 visas, so that's a fact. Let's round it off to 2,000. And then the next 10 books will say it was 4,000 because the child could go on the father's visa and not be counted. And then you read dozens of articles that say, no, it was 6,000 he saved because it was 2 children. No, it was 8,000 because they had 7 children. And tons of books and articles and YouTubes will tell you it was 10,000. And thanks to that, there's 100,000 descendants. And it seemed like the higher the number, the more credible it became, and the more outrageous it became, and the more of a hero he became. So this was kind of disturbing to me, but only in a factual sense that I couldn't really get to the bottom. While I was reading all my books, I kept contacting all the authors, all the journalists, all the archivists, all the professors, and I thought they would never answer me because I'm a complete beginner, and some of these guys are really famous, and I have these long lists of beginner questions, but they all answered, like all of them kept writing back to me, and it's always the kindness of strangers. But when I would say to them, well, how did you come to this figure of 10,000? A typical answer would be, well, I learned Lithuanian and I speak Russian and I have archivists in Moscow and I took the train and I went here and there and it's a fact. And I say, well, okay, but how come the last guy I spoke to said exactly the same thing for 4,000? And then it was like, okay, we're not discussing this anymore. So I was very, very puzzled, but it was just factual. But what disturbed me, like emotionally, was the scant attention that Jan Zwartendijk was getting in all my readings. That's what I've been doing for 4 years, just reading and reading and reading piles of books about these 2 consuls. And if it was a 500-page book about Sugihara, there might be 1 paragraph about Jan Zwartendijk. It was totally in the shadows. It was a 2-page newspaper article, there might be 1 sentence about Jan Zwartendijk. And I couldn't understand this. Even when I was going on Facebook sites, I would ask the people, do you have a Jan Zwartendijk stamp in the passport? And they'd say, oh, who? Or let me ask, or let me find out. And then, oh yeah, you're right, there is. And then that's it, end of story. But always honoring the legend of Sugihara like he was, 100% of the credit. Whereas we know for a fact, in order to get a transit visa, you first need a destination visa, even if it's a fake one. Countries don't want you coming in with they don't want you staying in their country. They don't want refugees staying there. So everyone first got the destination visa before they could get the transit visa, which means that they both played a 50% role, that they were equal heroes. Having said that, I understand there were many, many exceptions. There's my friend George Blumen, who got one from Sugihara, could not get from Jan Zwartendijk, the office was closed, and there's several people like that. But then there's the other side of a boat that arrives in Japan and 74 people were turned back. They were not accepted because they had the transit visa from Sugihara. They did not have the destination visa from Jan Zwartendijk, and they were not allowed in. Later on, they got help, but that's a whole different branch, but they were saved. But Jan Zwartendijk had to close, I believe it was August 3rd, 1940, and Shiun Sugihara was allowed to remain open 3 weeks longer. So that would explain why. And then the people in Japan, they would send back their visas to Lithuania to help others. And there were some Polish officers. So there were many, many that were not counted. So there were many, many, many exceptions. But in general, the big numbers, first a transit visa, first a destination visa, and then a transit visa, and then the Soviet exit permit. So I couldn't understand why one man was getting so much credit and so much, the light shining on him, and one was remaining in the shadows. And I came up with a theory that it's because Sugihara's widow, Yukiko, wrote a biography after he died. He had only given one little interview. I think he wrote one little paper. He didn't leave much behind. He didn't talk much about it. And her biography was not based on historical facts. It was her memoirs, which is fine. Many, many people write their memoirs. I wrote a memoir. But after she wrote her memoir, a phenomenon happened in that everybody else based their stories on rehashing her story. And for all intent and purpose, what she wrote became historical fact. and it inspired other academic works. And the legends grew and the embellishments were repeated, and he became an icon. And I'll just give you a few examples of what I mean. She wrote that she had to massage her husband's cramped hands from signing so many visas during the day. And that story got repeated, everywhere. And her very young son, 3 or 5 years old, said, "Daddy, we have to save these Jews or they will die." And he said, "Okay," and that was what got him started. And when his consulate was closed, he's at the train flinging blank visas out of the train window. All these refugees are running after the train yelling, "We will never forget you, thank you." And he's bowing, "I'm sorry, I couldn't do more." And there's not one uniformed Soviet soldier on the platform, but that's a minor detail. So he leaves Kaunas, he gets transferred to several places, Berlin and a whole bunch of places, but that's a whole long story. But now it's the end of the war and he returns to Japan. And now the legends really, really grow from this book of the widow. He's punished by his government for disobeying their direct orders not to help the Jewish refugees. They sent him a telegram and he disobeyed. I'm using this voice because I believe that all these half-truths, I just don't believe these stories. Okay, so he is shamed. He has to, he loses his pension, he's fired. Some books say he was forced to hand in his resignation. He can't find work. He can only get menial labor, knocking, door to door. Finally, he finds work in the Soviet Union. As a result, he can only see his children and wife 2 weeks out of the whole year. He dies in poverty, hero turned victim, lot of, fans. Becomes very, very popular in Japan and Israel, Lithuania, and America. So a lot of these claims are never substantiated. A lot of them are refuted by serious historians, but much of his present day myth and half-truth, the mixed facts and mixed fiction, is based on this. And as a result, there's now 4 Sugihara museums. There's full-length documentaries. There's movies like the one I saw. There's an asteroid named after him. There's parks. 3 months ago, yet another park in Israel. There's streets, there's coins, there's 1520 postage stamps. I mean, statues, it's a really, really long list. It goes on and on and on. And I have to stop now and state very clearly that Shiun Sugihara has nothing to do with what happened, all these stories after his death. Shiun Sugihara was a great hero. He saved my family. He saved over 2,000 Jews. He did it only for humanitarian reasons. And he was a wonderful, wonderful man. What I believe is that to honor someone, you don't undermine their credibility with suspect stories. If you truly want to honor them, you don't glorify him, because that does his memory a disservice. And I think he deserves accurate telling and critical telling. And more important, the result of all this publicity is that it completely ignores the other heroes. You had 2 Japanese men who were very necessary to help many of the Jewish refugees when they arrived in Japan. You had Ambassador De Decker, who issued the 2 visas to Nathan Goodworth and Pesla and got the ball rolling. You had, there's a whole long list. You had the Polish ambassador, Tadeusz Rome. But most importantly, as far as numbers go, those people all helped a few people. But as far as numbers go, Jan Zwartendijk helped over 2,000 people, played 50% of the role. And I don't understand how this cover-up works, because is this how long-term mass selective memory, gets warped? If we tell this lie long enough, does it become the truth? It just baffled me. It baffled me how Yad Vashem could award Shiun Sugihara the Righteous Award before he died, and then wait 13 years before they issued it to Jan Zwartendijk, and that was 21 years after he had died, and 57 years after he had issued the visas. So I couldn't wrap my head around this, and I really was very, very upset about this phenomenon. So I decided that maybe it would help if I made a list. And I made a list of similarities and differences. And I made a list of 4 similarities and 4 differences. And the 4 similarities I have, if I can remember them correctly, were they were both righteous men. They were both modest men. They both needed to work together, even though they never met, in order to make it work. And they played equal roles. They were men of conscience, something like that. And the 4 differences that I came up with were, first of all, the training, that Jan Zwartendijk had 0 diplomatic training and 0 diplomatic experience. He was a businessman. Whereas Shinu Sugihara had years of diplomatic training, years of experience. He spoke fluent Russian. His consulate was more of a cover-up. I mean, why would you have a consulate in a country that had 0, Japanese residents? So it was like an observation post where Shinu Sugihara could report back the troop movements, monitoring the situation for the government in Japan. It was like a spy, but it was a wartime attaché. Kaunas was a hotbed of spies, so that was not unusual at all. It's just the training could not have been more different. And the second difference that I came up with was the risk factor. That Jan Zwartendijk knew he was returning to Nazi-occupied Holland. So he was consulate for maybe 6 weeks. And as soon as his office was closed, he had to pack up his belongings and start heading back. And he knew that the Germans were very efficient and would know what he had done. He wasn't handing out visas in the middle of the night at the back door. These were thousands lined up in broad daylight and, viewed by everybody. So it was not hard to discover what he had done. He knew in Holland, if you helped one Jew, you were arrested. Everyone knew what happened when the Nazis arrested you. And here he had helped 2,500 Jews. So he was putting his life at risk, the life of his wife, Erna, his 11-year-old son, Jan Jr., his 13-year-old daughter, Edith, and his newborn baby, Rob. And he returned to Holland, and for the next 4 years, he lived in constant fear of that knock on the door. And he lived next door to Gestapo, can you imagine? So to say that it was risky, to say that he put his life in danger is just such an understatement. Whereas Sugihara was in a much, much safer position. He didn't risk his life because Japan was safe, Japan was free, and Japan was an ally of Germany, of course. And then the third difference that I wrote down was how the government promoted them. So Jan Zwartendijk got 0 recognition by the Dutch government. They didn't know what he'd done. The Dutch government was in exile in England. If they had known what he'd done, how could they have helped him? The government in Holland was the German puppets. Philips couldn't have helped him. They were in trouble and they had nothing to do with this consular work. So after the war, nobody knew what he had done and nobody even knew his name. Mr. Radio, Mr. Phillips, even the refugees didn't know his name. But after the war, thousands of underground resistor fighters were celebrated and honored. Unfortunately, there were more collaborators, but okay. And it was only in the 60s that someone made a serious effort to find out who this man with no name. And they contacted finally the Dutch Ministry of Foreign Affairs in The Hague, where I live, and they found out it was Jan Zwartendijk, and they contacted Jan Zwartendijk and invited him to come into the ministry. And Jan Zwartendijk got all dressed up and he was smiling and he thought, this is it, this is it. And he arrived here from where he lived, and not only did he not get a thank you or a handshake, he got a slap on the wrist for not following protocol and for overstepping his authority. And he came home a very dejected man. And actually, all he really cared about his whole life was to find out if anybody had survived. He had no idea if after he'd stamped people's passports or Lady Mas or other forms of ID, if he had sent them to their death. He'd never heard anything back from any of them. So eventually his son, Jan Jr., spent years searching for an answer, wanting desperately to give this answer to his father before he died. And finally the list came in from Tokayr in Israel with all the nationalities and all the numbers. And in total was that over 90% had survived the information that he had been looking for years, but it arrived the day of his funeral. unfortunately. And it might have arrived the day that he died, I'm not sure, but either the day he died or the next day. So that was very, very sad. And that was the recognition of the government where Shun Sugihara had the spotlight on him. To this day, the Japanese government is really, really proud of showcasing his deeds, you know, the big, big hero of World War II. And like I said, he deserves it. He's a huge, huge hero. But I think I get a little suspicious that it also, you know, deflects the attention, kind of glosses over the other side, you know, the collaboration, the brutal, the military.
Arlette,
Sorry.
you need to wrap up because we want to be able to get to the Q&A. So
okay, can you do the next photos perhaps?
Yeah. Hold on. Tell me where you want me to go.
Oh, okay. Okay, so that was the French visa showing that no visa was required. Next, I can do this very quickly. A picture of the train station in Kaunas, according to this legend icon. So please stop there a second. So this is what I do. This is my goal, is to set the record straight and to give credit where credit is due, and to show that Jan Zwaardendijk played a 50% role to demythify the myth that Sugihara acted alone. And I send rebuttals to every time I read anything. This was The Guardian, The New York Times, Jerusalem Post. I'm just constantly sending rebuttals when I read something. Okay, next. Family on the Sugihara list. Next. That was the memorial that I was invited to. Jeffrey, you have to tell me how many minutes I've left or if I should stop now. I have no idea.
Just try to go through the rest of these really quickly and then we will take the questions.
Okay, so I met the families of the consuls, and when I met Rob Zwaardendijk, as a thank you, I gave him the chapter I'd written in my book about his father. It was 3 years ago, so it was 3 pages. Right now, that chapter is 300 pages. And I got invited to the memorial. And I flew on the airplane. A complete stranger next to me says, where are you going? What are you going to do there? And I said, I'm going to Kaunas for Jan Zwaardendijk, but I can't explain to you the story because it would take 10 hours. And I didn't feel like talking to her, you know, a complete stranger. And she looks at me and goes, are you the granddaughter of Chava? Is Yadzia your aunt? Is Abraham your grandfather? Is Jacques your father? And I totally freaked. And it turns out that she was the director of the Phoenix Museum in Eindhoven, and she had read my story, and she was making an exhibition in the museum. She wanted my grandfather in there, and she asked me for photos. So that was a very strong moment for me. Next, please. My brother Roger made a Facebook page, Liwers. I got on there and said, I want to know if I have family. I got a phone call that night from the woman in white, right in the middle. And she said, my name is Yona. You have family, come to Israel. And we booked that night and we got there and there were 42 cousins and that was half of my family. I felt like the ugly duckling. I had no idea I had any of this. And I met Ronan, who's in the picture there, who said that his mother was from Benjin and she was the best friend of my aunt. His mother had ended up in Auschwitz, but she survived. And he said, come to Israel. I'm taking you on a pilgrimage. And then I'm going to take you on a pilgrimage to Benjin in Poland. I said, no, I can't. My father would turn over in his grave. We cannot go to Poland. It's horrible, but I'm really, really glad I went with him. Next. Oh, the beautiful, beautiful, beautiful Edith Zwaardendijk, the daughter of the hero, Jan Zwaardendijk. And here I am next to her. I chose this picture because I said to Esther, I can't believe the movie The Rescuers only has, you know, Sugihara, and I did my spiel. And she said, oh, why don't you contact Michael King, the director? And I did. And he instantly said, of course, I would love to tell the story in my part 2. So if you could contact us. And I went there to help her with the Zoom. And here she is giving a 1-hour interview to Michael King. That was another beautiful moment. Next, Fegi Goodward is the daughter of Nathan Goodward, who came up with the wording. And we are close friends now. And she warmly invited me to her home in Antwerp. Beautiful woman. Rainier Romer, the daughter of Ambassador Tadeusz Romer, also to meet her, to know her, to fall in love with her. She's so, so, so beautiful. And I'm so lucky to know these people. Next, Rob Zwaardendijk, the son of Jan Zwaardendijk, not the grandson, but the son. And there I am with my husband and his sister, Edith and Rob. Next. the museum exhibition when I met Olga on the airplane I mentioned to you, and I could go there and be interviewed on Dutch TV and be able to say loud and clear, Jan Zwartendijk is a great, great hero. He saved thousands of people. He really risked his life and the risk of the life of his family. And I want to thank him publicly. Next, this I just love so much. It's one of the Sugihara Facebook pages, and now it's changed to the Sugihara and Zwartendijk Facebook pages. And this is my dream that this will happen with everything, because this is the truth. Next. Whew, this is my last slide. I'm talking as fast as I can. So all this has brought me closer to my family's Shoah experience and to meet wonderful, wonderful people, like I mentioned. And the only regret I have is that I could not show my book to my father, because I know 100% what he would say. He would open page 1 and go, "This is terrible. This is not how it happened. This is completely wrong. Who told you this? How did you get this nonsense?" And then he would open to page 2 and go, "I'm really impressed. This is excellent. I'm proud of you. How did you figure this out?" So thank you so much for listening to me.
Very good. And so we will go long, because I am sure that there are questions, and all of our programs go beyond the 12 o'clock hour. You're welcome to leave if you have prior commitments, obviously. And boy, that is a really beautiful presentation, and I know that it comes across with the passion that you put behind everything that I know you do. So certainly you have a life's mission to tell the story right and bring it to the world. And I'm glad I gave you the opportunity to bring your story to our group. And there's 100 people here today who were able to hear you and to hear Esther. And I'm really, really excited and thrilled. And so for that, I want to open up I see there's a couple, Zelda, you have the first question to go. Please raise your hand using the reactions button on the very bottom of your toolbar, so we can see if you have a hand raised. And if you can't maneuver the button, just raise your hand. So I see Eric and Dana, you'll keep an eye on Eric for me so we will know. So Zelda, go.
It's not necessarily a question, because you really explained the whole situation. But as a survivor, you know, after the war, all we wanted to do is rebuild our lives. We didn't question it. As a child, especially, I didn't learn about the Holocaust and the intricacies of it until about 40 years ago. And I'm 86 now, so that tells you. A lot of the detail were pushed aside. Even when we came to the United States, we were told, forget about it, it was then, it's not, forget. So a lot of this is probably problematic, that the Holocaust survivors didn't bring attention to this, those that he saved. And also Yad Vashem made it very difficult to acknowledge somebody as righteous, because you couldn't make any money, you had to have so many documents. In our group, the Child Survivors Hidden Children, many of them cannot have their saviors acknowledged, because if they possibly took a ring in order to buy some food, that's considered taking money for saving. So all of these issues, and also Holland is a small little country. Who listens to them? Japan, you know, is a big country, a war country, and so on, in Russia. But I thank you. I've learned something. I never heard about him, really. Thank you very much.
Okay, and go ahead, Eric, and tell us where you're from, Eric, so we can learn about you.
I'm from Holland. I'm a friend of Arlette's. I've been playing in bands with Tom, her partner, ever since 1982. So I know the couple quite well. But what I wanted to say, maybe there's a reason why Sugihara was treated so well in Japan. It's not only because of the biography, probably, but also because the Japanese, of course, could use a righteous person, because they didn't behave that well during the war. And I think that could be a reason why they exaggerated, and why all this good news spread so easily in Japan and probably also abroad. I mean, the Japanese had their own camps in former Dutch East Indies, and they were responsible for a lot of suffering. So I think a righteous person as Sugihara was very welcome in post-war Japan. That was all. Thank you.
Okay. And I also want to take a second to Esther for you to call out the people that you invited, and the same thing that you said, Arlette, there are some people that you want to acknowledge in the crowd. So please take a second, Esther, you go first, and with the people that you mentioned and called out. So
Joe, are you there? Joe Heyman, he's hiding. There he is.
all you have to
Joe,
do is
say
say
hi.
hello. Say hello to us, Joe.
Joe was the most recently the managing director of the Holocaust Educational Trust, which is the largest Holocaust educational group in the UK. They've taken something like 30,000 students to Auschwitz for a day. They have amazing programs and are teaching Holocaust in schools and getting survivors into schools.
Joe, can you wave your hand so we know where you are, or speak so we can see you, because we can't see you yet. Where is Joe? Where's Jay?
Joe.
Hi, everyone.
Okay, Joe, nice to meet you. We've traded emails.
We've
Thank
traded
you so much for
emails.
coming.
Yeah.
Thank you much, and doing some great work there in the UK. And what other, and there was someone on your side, or Arlette, who was a family member of Jan, Jan, how were you, go ahead, you know what I'm talking about.
Rob, can you wave perhaps? Rob and Edith are his children.
Okay, and then maybe tell us a little bit about your father.
You have to unmute, Rob.
You have to unmute.
Yeah. Well, I was just saying, how much time do I have? 2 hours, maybe?
You have 5 minutes. Do it fast.
Okay. Well, I was born in 1939, so I was not a very present during this whole episode. And my father never spoke about his experience at all. It was only when I was something like 35 years old that some journalists came nosing around and asking questions. And I asked my father, well, what the hell happened? What did you do? And he said, I didn't do anything special. I just gave people some fake visa so that they could get out of the country. But anyone in my position would have done the same thing. And I said, okay, well, if you say so. And later on, when the story started to unfold, of course, I realized that that wasn't true. It's quite an extraordinary thing he was doing. But my father was always a man of high principles, black and white, good or bad. I hope I have taken up some of those lessons from him. Well, he didn't want to speak about it because, as Arlette already explained, first he didn't hear anything, so he thought that he had sent all those fugitives to their death in Russia, sidetracking them to Siberia or something. And later on, yes, I am sure that he was very much afraid of the Dutch, of the Germans in Holland, that they would discover what they had. And mostly the Germans make very good notes of whatever is happening. So they track him down. So he must have been very much afraid. He never spoke anything about this whole episode to anyone. And but still, he was a modest man. He would have hated all the attention, so he didn't mind at all that there was not much attention given to this whole story. But I'm sure that he would have found it an honor that his deeds are being remembered and could serve as an example to young people of what you can do if you're in a bad position. You can take the right road or you can take the easy road. He could have said, as a consul, this was not in his power to give any visa. So he could have closed the door and said, go home with a clean conscience. But no, he thought that was good. So that's an example for young people, which I think he would have loved and would have been very happy with.
Oh, that's
Thank
it.
you.
Rob,
Thank you.
Rob, I wanted to tell you that this, and not for everyone, this is being recorded. So your words right there are so powerful and will make a difference as we take this recording and share it around the world. So I'm thanking you for for coming today. I'm thanking you for being so honest and to be part of our Let's Talk. So I think it makes such a difference to have you with us and to be with us for that. Is there anybody else, Esther and Arlette, that you wanted to call out from the audience? Okay, is there any other questions from the audience before we let you go? And I really want to tell you that I'm honored to put on these programs. I'm honored that you're all coming to them. And I know I forgot to ask you, Dana, I know you have a question. I can't believe it. There you go. I'm not cutting you off, so go.
Hello, everybody. Okay, so Jeffrey, there are some comments from the chat as well as some of my own. So I guess what I want to ask is, from both Arlette and Esther, what do you think motivated these rescuers, these diplomats, to take the actions that they did? Pretty much, I think in all cases, going against orders from their home country. And, you know, we're all trying to, I think, use them as examples for acting the right way in wrong circumstances. And what are your thoughts now that you know these rescuers so well from studying them? What do you think motivated them to take these extraordinary acts, oftentimes at their own danger?
Go ahead.
Yeah, I think that if you make too much of a deal out of how special they were and how righteous they were, it might make other people believe, well, I could never do that because I could never be like that. But if you look at them just as very ordinary people with a very strong conscience of what's right and what's wrong, and then we know that we could all do this, that's a much better example to follow. I think that that's all they were. They had extraordinary consciences and they had no other guiding motive except to help, humanitarian reasons, to help others, nothing else.
Esther?
When Martin wrote his book, The Righteous, this is on regular people who help Jews. Most of the common responses when asked why, they said, well, it was the only right thing to do. It was the obvious thing to do. You know, these are fellow human beings. So I think it was the same with the diplomats. They felt, you know, this is what you do to help people, and we are in a position to be able to do something to help. So there are those who helped. There are those who became blind all of a sudden and deaf, and there are those who turned in other betrayed Jews. So it's a range of human experience, and luckily within that range, there are good people doing decent things.
And Zelda, I see is your hand up again, so please.
But ask Ursula, she's got her hand up.
Oh, Ursula, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Yes, I'm stunned, I'm blown away. I would like to recommend a fantastic book by Eva Vogelman. It's called Courage and Conscience. Eva, as probably many know, is a psychologist. She's a 2G, and she wrote this splendid book about what motivated the rescuers. And I recommend it highly.
Okay, thank you.
And I just want to add that these diplomats, they knew what was going on in the occupied territories, what was happening to the Jews. they were motivated not because they were good people, but they knew what was going on there. That's what caused them, and they were good people to do it, because the general public really didn't know the details, what was happening in the German part of Poland, like in my case. So they knew, and therefore they were inspired to do good things.
Okay, thank you.
So we had a follow-up in the chat. There's good information in the chat for Ruth Bollinger. Some people know more about the person she was asking about, Clark Husted, on her, the rescuer, on her paperwork. So I just, I'm going to try to screenshot that in case she doesn't see that in the chat. But that's what's wonderful about your presentations, Jeffrey, is that it's a great way to connect people and help people get some of the information that they are looking for. And Jeffrey, did you give the name of Arlette's book? Could we put that in the chat so people could get the name of that, please?
Arlette, can you type it in or share it? Okay. And Esther, do you want to put any kind of information? Oh, can you type that in the chat though to everyone?
Oh, you want me to type? It's called the Liwers. I can type it, but it's, you know, it's just printed out. That's all. It's not published yet.
And Esther, do you want to provide any kind of
Just martingilbert.com. I do monthly newsletters with Martin's writing and little bits of sanity or insanity from me. And you can subscribe through the website and get.
And I also want to recommend that you visit the Martin Gilbert Education Learning Center. And
Yes.
what's the URL for that?
Yes.
You can put that in chat also.
Put it in the chat.
Before we head out, I want to let you know that our next program is on March 6th. It will feature two professors of emeritus talking about anti-Semitism, prejudice, and how COVID is being used against Jews. So you will quickly see a promotion from me about this. Also, I want to let you know in April, there's a 3-part Yom HaShoah series that we're putting on. I've been working on it for 9 months. I'm very excited about it. Anybody who can connect me to a survivor, and I am really working hard to ask survivors to join our programs. You can tell just from today how firsthand witnesses make such a difference, and how we can compare and contrast all of us together working on this. Our goal everywhere, every time, is to say never again. And so we have 3 programs. The April 24th program, I'm asking if you can connect me with any family members who are survivors. We have a very special program that we'll be announcing very shortly. So again, thank you very much, Esther and Arlette and Dr. Dana, for helping me. Thank you all for coming on board. We had a terrific group today, and I really appreciate and honor your support of the group. And hello to all my friends. I couldn't call all of you and say hello because there are so many. So Ava, I see you there in the corner down there. Hello. And have a nice weekend, rest of your weekend. Thanks again, guys. Take care.
Mwah.